Today we're comparing the CZ Shadow 2 up against the CZ P-01, and we're gonna see if the $550 price difference is worth it. Jumping right into the overview of these two guns, these look incredibly similar, almost identical, I would say. Really, you're gonna see a lot more modern slide cuts on the CZ Shadow 2, with the core function of the Shadow 2 being a single action only, and the P-01 being both a double action and a single action. I think they really streamlined the Shadow 2 in a lot of different ways, including the firing mechanism. They really refined the whole trigger system as a whole. When you look at this entire gun, you can tell exactly what they were going for with the modern slide cuts, the modern trigger guard, single action trigger, slightly better ergonomics on the frame. But they really took a lot from the P-01. The frames look very similar besides the trigger guard. The grip area is almost identical. They just changed the checkering on the back. The hammer on the P-01 Omega is almost the same hammer as the CZ Shadow 2 Compact. And of course, one of the more noticeable features of this Shadow 2 is the optics cut. The P-01 Omega or P-01 convertible still is not optics cut. Still rocking irons with this more traditional double single action handgun. Both guns are rocking aluminum frames, which aid a lot with recoil reduction. We'll get into that later, but you definitely notice it in weight. The P-01 is 28.1 ounces stock without the weapon light, and the Shadow 2 Compact is 30 ounces stock without the light or the optic. So it's a little bit heavier, and the reason that is I think if you look down the slide, it is more squared off and not as rounded as your P-01, so they must just have a little bit extra material on there. One thing that is really cool is the P-01 and Shadow 2 Compact have interchangeable mags, so I can use my old P-01 mags in my Shadow 2 Compact and vice versa. One thing I did notice is loading the mags in the P-01, it felt like a higher quality magazine than the Shadow 2. Just kind of a side note, but I thought that was interesting as this gun is nearly half the cost. Something that's really noticeable about the P-01 for me is the trigger pull is just not very good. I've gotten a lot of hate about that comment specifically. Obviously, my background is striker-fired handguns. I am not a double action or a revolver person, so take that for what you will. My background is striker-fired, not double action triggers, but I just don't like it. Even in single action, the trigger breaks really far back and it's just really hard to shoot fast. However, with the Shadow 2, I noticed it still breaks kind of far back. It is further forward than the P-01, but it just has a much better trigger pull. It very much resembles a high quality single action trigger. It feels much more refined over the P-01. And obviously, since my background is striker fired guns, I do not like the double action trigger on here. It is incredibly heavy, incredibly long. Just adds a lot of time for you to move off target slightly. I found that I just can't shoot as accurate in double action as I can in single action or striker fired handguns. Take that for what you will. Obviously, my background justifies me not being a good double action shooter, but to me, I just found that I ran this gun in single action only. When I would carry it, I would chamber around and leave it ready to go. With the decogger on here, I found it kind of annoying since I only ran it in single action only. And one of my biggest complaints about the Shadow 2 Compact is the safety. The safety is very small and it's very easy and very light to flick, which might sound like a good thing, but for me, I found it was really hard to deactivate the safety and shoot. It just felt like I had to think about it a lot and make sure that my thumb actually clicked it off. It's semi-tactile. It makes a little bit of a sound, but you really can't feel it when you flick it off safe. It just kind of hits a wall. I would have much preferred to see a 1911 or 2011 style safety on here. A little bit bigger, a little bit further off. I understand why they didn't want to do that. If you're gonna put a safety on here, I would like to see a little bit bigger of a safety or just no safety at all. I understand why there's one on here with the trigger pull being as light as it is. For me, that's really the only thing I don't like about this handgun is the safety. The trigger is much better over the P-01. One thing I noticed that's different between the P-01 and the Shadow 2 is this mag release. Here they have a bolted on extended piece that matches the grip color. I found that this mag release is actually kind of hard to push in. Not super difficult, but it's more noticeable when you go from the Shadow 2 to the P-01. The P-01 mag release just feels a lot more refined, a lot softer than the Shadow 2. While this is a newer gun, I really haven't shot this enough to break in a mag release. So I think this is gonna be true across the board. However, what's really cool is you could throw a bigger mag release on here if you wanted it more extended, if you were doing competitions or you preferred that style mag release. So there's a little bit more flexibility with the Shadow 2. Obviously have to note that we are running two different kinds of weapon lights on here. We have a TLR-7A on here because I carried this gun for quite a long time. And we have a TLR-1HL on this one. I wanted to make this a little more aggressive and kind of tune it to what I would carry now, 2 years in the future from when I was carrying this. I really like the TLR-1 a little bit more just because of the output, and it's a little bit heavier, so it is gonna fight some of that recoil. On top, we're running a Holosun 508T, with a CH Precision optics plate. Can't complain about both of these in our testing. Nothing loosened, nothing broke. Held zero really nicely. And it's kind of cool that this plate has a Glock dovetail in the back if you wanted to run backup iron sights. If you are going to keep the Shadow 2 Compact stock, you will have a high vis front sight, and with the P-01 you just get a standard white 3-dot. I can't remember if these are tritium or not. I don't believe they are. They look like they are just a painted white dot, and while they're okay, they're just a very generic iron sight. I did like the iron sights on the Shadow 2 a little bit more before I threw a dot on there. I think the Shadow 2 Compact has a much better slide profile. I like the slide serrations more than on the P-01. The P-01 are rather aggressive and sharp, and they're in a good spot, but I really like the aesthetic and the use case of the Shadow 2s just a little bit better. The Shadow 2 slide looks a lot more sleek and a little more modern as well, which I can really appreciate. The ergonomics are better over the P-01. I feel a little more cramped when I'm holding this gun. There's a little bit of pressure on my knuckle right there. Feels rather uncomfortable. I don't have that as bad with the Shadow 2. It looks like it's the exact same cut, so I'm not sure if that's just how they changed the grip panels or if there's actually less material there. It just doesn't feel like it's binding as bad on my hands. And I found that I could actually shoot the Shadow 2 quite a bit faster than the P-01, which for me is incredibly important. Obviously, we're a comp company, so we care a lot about split times and speed. When shooting both guns, it was very noticeable how much faster I could shoot this gun. So going forward, if I'm gonna carry a heavy CZ, it'll probably be the Shadow 2. It's honestly not surprising at all seeing how many people use the Shadow 2 in competition. This gun shoots really flat with pretty much every kind of ammo we put through it today. And if you want to run a semi-stock gun, I think it's a pretty good option. And if you really like single action triggers, but you really don't want a 1911 or a 2011, I think CZ has something to offer here. Another big complaint with this gun is gonna be price. Coming in at $1,180. It is a rather steep price tag for this gun. While this gun is really polished and refined, I think they did a good job. It just feels like it's a bit expensive, especially when you can buy a SIG 365, a Glock 43, pretty much you name it, striker-fired handgun, and perform very similar. If I was to stack this up against a Glock 19, which it is very similar in size to, I think I would actually shoot the Glock a little bit better. I'm not sure why that is. I think it comes down to my practice with the trigger. Obviously, the results may vary. People who shoot this kind of trigger all the time are gonna be a lot faster at it than a striker-fired gun. I shoot a lot more striker-fired, so that kind of makes sense. If you guys made it this far in the video, you probably like the content we make. If you guys want to see more of that, I definitely recommend hitting that subscribe button so you'll be notified in the future when we make more content like this. When it comes to recoil between the P-01 and the Shadow 2 Compact, we've seen on average a 28.22 degree of muzzle flip out of this P-01 when we remove the weapon light, and out of the Shadow 2 when we remove the optic and the light, we've seen 28.41 on average. Therefore, there is a 0.66 difference in recoil, very negligible. Most people actually would not notice it. However, obviously when I was shooting, I noticed this had less recoil because of the weight of the weapon light compared to the P-01. So if you buy this gun and you keep it stock, both guns are gonna recoil about the same. When it comes to availability, the P-01 Omega or the P-01 convertible is gonna be a little bit harder to find. We did some searching looking to get a price on this, and it just seemed like it was a lot harder to find. 2 years ago when I bought this, these were everywhere. They were abundant and easy to find for a relatively good price. Online, we did find this for $625 on Gunbroker. However, your local gun shop will probably still have some of these lying around. With the Shadow 2 Compact, we found it for $1,180. It was a lot easier to find online. Back a couple months ago when I was looking for this gun, it was very hard to find, so things are changing pretty rapidly with the gun market. Now it's a lot easier to find, so when you're looking at picking up either of these guns, you're probably gonna find a lot more Shadow 2 Compacts than you will P-01 Omega or convertibles. As I mentioned earlier, I carried the P-01 for quite a long time. I think it was my carry gun for just about 2 years. It was definitely sporadic, switching in and out between different handguns we were making comps for. Carried the 43X, the 365, the 320, all of those intermittently for videos, but this is kind of the gun that stayed in my carry rotation for 2 years. If I start carrying an aluminum framed handgun again, it will definitely be the Shadow 2. This trigger I can just perform much better with over the P-01. I just like the ergonomics quite a bit more on the Shadow 2. The trigger is significantly better. I can shoot it much faster. And with it having a red dot, I just feel much more comfortable shooting this gun. It hits very close to home. I'm very comfortable with red dots on handguns. So this is much more in the realm of a carry option for me now. However, before I do that, I do want to find a better safety. This one is pretty bad, and I definitely would rather carry a striker-fired gun over it right now. Not only to shed some of that weight, but also to have a little bit more confidence with a better safety Most of my striker-fired guns don't have safeties, so I really don't have to worry about that. If you have a P-01 or you really want to save the extra $550 and not buy the Shadow 2 Compact, I would definitely look at a Cajun Gunworks trigger kit. I've heard that it works wonders on the P-01 trigger, and it would really get it closer to the Shadow 2 Compact level of precision and feel. I personally have no experience with Cajun Gunworks. I've just heard really good things, so I had to throw that in this video. So who are these guns for? I think the Shadow 2 Compact is for somebody who is looking for an aluminum framed single action carry gun, or even wants to use this gun for competition. Like I said, it's a flat shooter, and I think it would do really well in competitions. That's why you see its bigger brother, the Shadow 2, in a lot of competitions. A lot of people run that gun. It just works really good in the competition space. But if you're somebody who's looking to save a buck and you want to save $550, I think the P-01 should definitely not be overlooked. There's some things I personally don't like about it, but if you're already used to a double single action trigger, you're gonna feel right at home. I hope today's video really helped you decide between the Shadow 2 Compact and the P-01. If you guys like this video, we'd appreciate a like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.